Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, who I've locked in a tower until he finishes reading every single Stephen King novel. It is, of course, King Newbie, Matt Freeman. How's it going up there, Matt?
Well, I just have a couple of favors to ask.
Oh, sure.
A mechanical pencil with 0.7 millimeter lead.
Okay.
And a small jar of Gerber baby food, split peas. You can scrape off the labels if you must.
Just like one small jar, just like one time, or like a regular infusion of Gerber baby food?
Oh, just one will do.
Okay. Well, I can't see any avenue to escape with. Sure. You know what? Sure. Here you go, Matt.
Excellent.
This week on the show, The Eyes of the Dragon continues with chapters 46 through 71. Thomas finds himself king, and Peter finds himself imprisoned at the top of the Needle for the rest of his life. Fortunately, our young prince has a plan, and it involves a dollhouse. So there you go, folks. Playing with dollhouses is good.
Yep.
Settled.
It was always part of the plan.
Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Oh, it was really good stuff as usual. I think the stuff that I'm enjoying the most is when we sort of pick a character and we do a deep dive on them in the story. I mean, so, this week, I think the person that we deep dive on, well, I guess centrally is Peter, but then additionally is Peter's friend,
Ben.
And thought that was really, really great. It's such a great concept, actually, to explore. And, the way that him and his father both deal with the situation is very human. And I was pretty glued to the story for that whole segment.
We need a term for this when Stephen King does this deep dive into random characters unexpectedly. What's a good term for this?
I don't know. I can't do this on the spot, Scott. Kingification?
Kingification?
Kingquisition.
I don't know if the Kingquisition. No, I don't know if I like that. That sounds too negative.
Yeah, that's true.
See, this is why I don't just so you folks know, everything named to do with this podcast has been either Matt or my wife. I've never come up with a good name for anything. So,
well, I guess it's not working for me right now, but
okay. Well, you know what? Why don't we just, there you go. We reached the conclusion at the same time. Folks out there, what should our official glossary term be for when Stephen King decides to kind of veer and from the main story and focus on the backstory of some side character, or not that they're not important characters, but that they're minor players that another author would probably just have them do their plot machinations and then move on. What is a good term for that?
Yeah, we've been talking about it pretty much the whole time, but it would be helpful to have a term.
Yeah, it'd be just quick, easy reference, and then we can just move on. Yeah. All right, let's get into this week's reading. But before we do that, I just had a quick announcement. Actually, less of an announcement, more of just a happy new year. It's 2022 now. This is our first episode of this year, and we've got quite a bit more work to do this year. And I just wanted to quickly go over the schedule for everyone, just so we're all on the same page going into 2022. Is that okay with you, Matt?
Sounds good to me.
All right, so we're obviously in the middle of The Eyes of the Dragon right now. We have 2 more episodes and then an overall discussion episode on that. So we're going to be wrapping that up at the end of this month. Then we're going to be taking a look at the Stephen King short story, There was just a one-off episode we're going to do on that. This was actually a late addition to the schedule. I didn't originally put it in there, and then I changed my mind, I think, after we had already started, and I was like, no, we're going to do that. It's only one episode. We're just going to throw it in there.
Sounds good.
And the episode, ironically, will actually mark the exact halfway point of our season 2. So that's by number of episodes, not by like number of books, because after we only have 3 more novels to discuss in season 2. They are beefy ones, though. We're going to be talking about The Talisman, and that will be a 12 episode series talking about Stephen King and Peter Straub's The Talisman. Then we are going to be working into the sequel to The Talisman, which is Straub and King coming back to their world with Black House. That is a 10 episode series, and we're going to wrap up season 2 with our coverage of The Stand, which is going to be a big one, Matt. That's a big old book. It's going to be 16 episodes, and that doesn't even count either of the TV show adaptations of that novel, which I feel like we'll have to do something on at some point.
That sounds fun.
Yeah. So season 2 is going to wrap up in October of this year. So October 27th. So a mere 11 months away, we'll be done. And no, we don't know what we're doing after that. So don't ask yet. We'll figure it out as we get closer. But that's what 2022 is going to look like. And of course, we will continue to have our monthly other levels of the Tower episodes for our patrons over on our Patreon. That's patreon.com/doofmedia. I believe this month we are doing Hearts in Atlantis. Is that correct? I think that is. I need to watch that.
I think so. I haven't watched it yet either.
Yeah, so we'll have at least 12 more episodes of that, and maybe some other fun. I know I want to do at least one more Do the King Thing contest this year, hopefully 2, because we've worked out all the kinks, right, Matt? And we're pros at contest running now.
Absolutely, as long as no more than 20 people make submissions.
Oh, no. So that is 2022. We're very excited. We hope you guys are very excited. Lots of big and very good books to cover, Matt. I put The Stand at the end just because it's one of the best books ever, and I just felt like the perfect way to cap off the season. But we've got some really good novels to get through before that, so I'm jazzed, man. I'm ready. 2022, bring it on. Me
too. I remain as excited as ever about this list of books. I've been looking forward to all these. It's funny, I don't know what like half of these are about, but I'm excited to read some of these Straub collaborations. Me too, because I've never really spent a lot of time on the prose in either of these two novels, and I'm really curious to see the Straub effect of these books. You know, we've been going so hard into Stephen King. I think we've got our hands around Stephen King's voice pretty solidly now, and I'm really interested to see what that influence of another author does to our method and what we see and what we understand. You know, I'm really, really, really excited about that. Me too. And hopefully by the time we get to The Stand, the pandemic will just be totally over, right? Yeah. It'll just be done, 100% done. I mean, that would be sort of cosmically appropriate, right? And thus it has to happen. Yeah. So COVID, July 14th. Your days are numbered. Get ready. All right, let's move into this week's episode covering chapters 46 through 71 of The Eyes of the Dragon. And our chapters this week begin as we shift over to Thomas, who has just woken up from his fever to find out he is now king of Delain. And our little boy Tommy, Matt, he's not taking it too well. Some of the first lines of the chapter are, "No, I don't want to be king. I won't be king. I refuse. I utterly refuse." You know, like they say, like the best king or president or whatever is like the person who really doesn't want to be king or president. But I'm not sure when they say that this is what they mean, you know? Yeah, I mean, this seems like one case where he might just be correct. Yeah. Although, you know, we don't yet know where the story is going. Maybe he's going to do a great job. Probably not, though. I mean, we do see the one act of law he's put in his first month, and it's not one that's going to win the hearts and minds of the people. Let's say that. Yeah, he seems like he is behind the 8 ball for sure. Yeah. So Flagg is mostly absent from the story in this week's reading, and we'll move away from Thomas as well pretty quickly here and shift to really just focus on Peter's story. But I just wanted to briefly chat with you about Flagg's kind of continued manipulation. I love this opening part where Flagg says to himself, "You need me, Tommy, but it would be a very bad mistake for me to tell you that. No, you must say it to me. There must be no question about who is in charge. Not now, not ever." And then he manipulates Thomas into doing exactly that. He like feigns that he's leaving the kingdom and basically has Thomas beg him to stay. It's despicable and brilliant. It is. It's very I don't know. I sort of find it recognizable in some of the shitty people that I know will do things like this. You know. Yeah, I mean, there's a term for this that I'm not. It's not gaslighting, right? Because you're not. I don't know what the term for this is, but I feel like there's a term for this specific kind of manipulation. Yeah, I'm sure it'll come to us.
But I do love the use of Tommy here for Thomas. We didn't talk about this last week, but this is something that Flagg does continuously with Thomas. He constantly refers to him as Tommy just about every time, not only audibly, verbally in dialogue to him, but also in his inner thoughts. And the only other person I actually went and looked because I was curious, the only other person we've seen do that in the novel so far is King Roland, Thomas's father. And the only times we've seen him do it is times where he was like ignoring or hurting the boy, like when he showed him his carved boat. Roland kept saying, "Oh, that's very good, Tommy, but try to be like your brother." It's just, it's really fascinating to me because it is a much more childish, infantilizing version of the name Thomas. And I think it's important to note that the narrator never calls him Tommy. It's always Thomas to the narrator because that's his name.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely noticed lately that King is aware of the the diminutive forms of men's names, like Bobby Garfield, for example. We pointed out back then that all of the the boys in that story received more boyish forms of their names. And there's definitely I think a theme of growing up in this book. So
sure,
the insistence of Flagg on kind of infantilizing Thomas and keeping him.
I see you did it too.
Yeah, I did. Keeping him in that in that pocket of being a child who needs to be cared for, even as he is growing older. I think even that is a kind of power move. And I think, like you pointed out, since his father also uses it occasionally, Flagg is sort of using it to identify himself with Thomas's father.
Yeah, and with the emotions that Thomas was feeling at the times when his dad kind of, dismissively referred to him in this infantilizing type. It's really clever, and I love the detail of it, and I just loved it. I loved realizing that this is what Flagg was doing here.
It's awesome, yeah.
Especially considering he's about to be king. Like it's one thing to call like the second prince of a king who's a child Tommy, but like when he's about to be crowned king, like definitely shouldn't be calling him Tommy anymore.
Right. Emphasizes how much power Flagg has, that he can do that and
yep.
Not just get away with it, but have it not even really be remarked upon by Thomas.
Yep. So the night before his coronation, Thomas is terrified and unable to sleep, but fortunately, good old Unky Flagg is here to give him a sedative to calm him down. I love this part so much here. Flagg took the boy's sleeping hand in his own and patted it with something like love. In his own way, he did love Thomas, but Sasha would have known Flagg's love for what it was, the love of a master for his pet dog. I'm not sure I ever really realized how regular and continuous the dog imagery is in this novel from Sasha's declaring moment of the god and dog thing. I don't think I ever picked up on that until this read, but I'm really, really loving how consistent it is. It's really wonderful.
Right on. I agree. This is the exact kind of thing that I would normally not notice reading a book in the normal human way. But it does jump out when you're doing it this way and discussing it, and it is great. And I think this is one of the few notes in the entirety of the Dark Tower that kind of humanizes Flagg a little bit by saying that he does love Thomas in a way, but it even in so doing, I don't think it makes us accidentally like Flagg. I think it's still, he still sucks just as much. Yeah,
I mean, the story kind of goes out of its way sometimes to build him up as this barely human antagonist, evil sorcerer. There's a line we're going to pull here in a couple minutes that does exactly that. But I think it is important that every once in a while we also bring Flagg down to earth and be like, okay, he is also just like a guy, and he feels things that aren't just evil, and power hungry and manipulation, and he feels a warped, distorted sort of love and I love that we take the time to do that. That wasn't necessary, right? It's just King. You could have the scene doesn't change if you have this moment of genuine, if not warped, affection Flagg has for this boy. But yeah, it opens a small window into his complicated nature, and I think that's great.
I just had a thought which I'm going to throw in here, even though there's a later point in this conversation where we could talk about this, but it's the idea that Flagg is the evil wizard,
mm-hmm.
but he's not he doesn't look old, right? Like King could have done this character as a man with a long white beard, looks kind of like Merlin, kind of classic wizard appearance. But by all accounts, Flagg kind of looks, middle age at the oldest. It's kind of an intentionally vague description, but he's never really described as being old.
Yeah,
And
true.
I think that's really interesting because Flagg is neither young, meaning he can have the sort of innocence of youth, nor is he old with the associations that King often places on the elderly, where he often associates the elderly with the white. We have stuff like What Happened in Insomnia. Flagg is always portrayed as being just kind of an ambiguously aged adult. I guess I picture him being somewhere between like 35 and 45, honestly.
Hmm, hmm.
And it's just interesting to sort of bring that out, because typically you would expect the old wizard to, explicitly portrayed as being, extremely old. You would portray him as looking old, but he doesn't look old.
Yeah, I mean, I think my like Disney addled brain has just like made him look like Jafar in my head, which I mean, I don't think that's too far off. I mean, I think he's much more hooded and cloaked and much more Western than the Jafar character in Aladdin. But yeah, no, I think you're onto something there. I was kind of curious where you were going with it, but I love this idea where we've talked about, you know, through Insomnia, we talked about King's respect and admiration for the elderly. Through Low Men in Yellow Coats, we talked about his respect and admiration for youth and young and kids. And there's this giant middle ground here, and it's interesting that Flagg occupies that. Like this I think this perhaps segment of humanity that King is not entirely positive on. It's like kids are innocent, old people are wise, and middle-aged people are just kind of assholes.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think you're basically right. I mean, I take your connection with Jafar, except this is a character who is explicitly said to be like hundreds of years old, right? And
yeah.
So that just, yeah, I don't know. I thought it was worth pointing out.
Yeah, I mean that he obviously has some sort of magical control over his age, and that he is choosing not to depict himself as the aged, wise, elderly wizard that a story like this would expect is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with that quite yet, but let's definitely think about that more. Because I mean, like we said, this is a lot about Flagg here. Maybe Flagg just hates old people and never wants to look old, no matter how timeless he is.
Yeah, that's maybe, yeah.
So the day of Thomas's coronation arrives, and it is remarkable how quickly Thomas is able to just completely embrace his inner greed and lust for power. I love this part. Thomas's servants, he had no butler, being too young, but this would be provided for him soon, dressed him for the occasion in fine clothes of black velvet, which were strewn with jewels. All mine, Thomas thought with wonder, and with dawning greed. These are all mine now, and high black boots of the finest kind of leather. So I love this because this was obviously cleverly planted seeds from Flagg, when he took him down to the treasure vault, and here's all the stuff, and it will never be yours, Thomas. And now it's been granted. So it's like, it's a seed that was planted in him years ago that is now suddenly blooming as he's given this stuff.
Yeah, and we've created a situation where even if Thomas were to have a crisis of conscience about, the fact that he knows what really happened to his father, then he'll already be too accustomed to the rewards of being king to easily give them up.
Yeah, and I love that phrase, dawning greed. I think that's such a it's just like it's perfect to this feeling of how quickly a human being like gets used to something and covets it, that something that he never had before, and suddenly, oh, it's mine now I covet it. It's great.
Absolutely.
And then Thomas celebrates the fact that all these people are cheering for him and not for Peter, and quite evilly hopes that Peter is listening to the cheers. We see this. Do you hear that, Peter? He shrilled in his mind. They're cheering for me. They're cheering for me. They're finally cheering for me. And I love the emphasis on that, because they were then told that no, they're not, right? Like, I love this. Thomas, who was only a boy, thought they were for him. Flagg, who had perhaps never been a boy, knew better. The cheers were because the time of unease was past. They were cheering the fact that things could go on as they always had, that the shops could be reopened, that grim-eyed soldiers in tight leather hats would no longer stand watches around the castle in the night, that everyone could get drunk following this solemn ceremony and not worry about waking to the sounds of a confused midnight revolt. No more than that, no less than that. Thomas could have been anyone. Anyone at all. He was a figurehead.
Yeah. God, Thomas is such a tragic figure. I mean, you're right that he is kind of losing it here. And the last we see of Thomas is pretty ominous. He is sounding a little bit evil and unhinged. But I still feel bad for him.
Oh yeah. I mean, he's a boy. He's 12 years old and he doesn't understand. And he's been so cleverly and effectively manipulated into feeling this way, starve a person for attention their entire life and then heap thousands and thousands times the amount of admiration they've ever gotten in their life all at once. That's going to fuck someone up for sure. And you definitely feel for poor Thomas here.
Yep.
I also love just this, like that little note there, Flagg, who had perhaps never been a boy, which we know is not true as of the ending of the Dark Tower itself.
Exactly. Yeah. But it is a thematically perfect and appropriate sentence. Because, I mean, like we were just talking about, there's this juxtaposition present in, low men in yellow coats and hearts in Atlantis at large, between childhood with the associations of innocence and goodness versus adulthood with associations of, being low and being corrupted and being scared and thus acting out of your fear and doing terrible things. And so like to say that Flagg may never have been a boy is like saying that he is a human being who is almost completely absent of any kind of innocence or goodness.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there. I really like that. I'm glad we don't do any kind of backstory stuff with Flagg here. And I kind of understand King's desire to, in the final book of the Dark Tower, like give him a backstory, a definitive backstory, just because like this is the end of this opus that Flagg has been such a central part of this whole time. So we need to flesh out who he is just a little bit, but it doesn't belong in this book. And so it's perfect here that we just kind of leave his past a mystery, how much magic he has as a mystery, his age a mystery. Like I love that we leave all these things mystical and terrifying. And you're right, it's thematically perfect.
Yep.
But of course, Matt, while Thomas is dawning on greed, he is still suffering from some guilt. He has these horrible, horrible dreams where he is back looking through the eyes of the dragon and seeing his father yell at him and chastise him. And this time what he's saying is, I was poisoned and you're not acting upon it. I love that thing. Is like, it's one thing, to not stop him. I understand that, but to let your brother take the fall for it. He's apparently having this dream over and over again. And I love, I love this part here. In those years, Thomas discovered two things. Guilt and secrets, like murdered bones, never rest easy. But the knowledge of all three can be lived with.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a delightful turn of phrase there. I don't know. Like, I just love the writing there. I don't have anything particularly clever and insightful to say about it, but it's just very, very to the point about exactly the emotion you're trying to get from it. It's perfect.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think what I would say is you could turn that into like 3 paragraphs of explication about the nature of how exactly you're going to be eaten up inside by these emotions, but ultimately you can survive and get through the day, blah blah blah. I mean, just kind of go on like I just did there, but King was very concise about it. And also, I think this is a recurring theme, so he doesn't really need to hammer on it because he's already planted the seeds by saying stuff like, Flagg knew that you could, the people's minds were like a deep well where you could throw something into it, and
sure,
and a child might believe that meant it was gone, but actually it's just under the surface and it's always going to be there, and you can successfully sort of ignore it, but you kind of also know it's there, so we're building this idea of how what it's like to live with that kind of guilt,
for sure. And I like that we kind of mused on this last week on what we thought Thomas's reaction would be, and you're absolutely right. His reaction to this thing is just like we kind of predicted last week, because everything's already happened, because it's all laid out in front of him and he's already been given all these things. It's very easy to just toss that truth into that well and forget about it, or try to forget about it as much as possible.
Yep.
And I like what you said about it being short and sweet and to the point here. I think it's really interesting the way, King is an author that definitely does sprawl at times. He definitely takes many, many pages to do things that perhaps are not considered strictly necessary for the narrative. But I do think it's really interesting the ways in which he knows when it is appropriate to sprawl and when it is unnecessary. And you're absolutely right. He could have gone on for pages about Thomas and the secret's not resting easy here, but he just gets there and then we move on.
Yeah,
we move on from Thomas and we're done.
Yep.
So we then cut over to poor Peter stuck up in his tower. I love how we observe Peter first from almost like a third party. The narrator just gives us his actions for the first week after his imprisonment, but we see none of his interior thoughts. Like, it's no longer we're being told a story in which we're in a third person omniscient perspective. We're just like observing Peter. All we see here is that Peter spends all day looking out his window, that he's refusing to eat, that he's not doing anything. He seems defeated. He seems used up. He seems broken. And I think King does this. He holds this perspective for a very specific purpose, because he wants us to think these things about Peter. He wants our thoughts about Peter to match what the guards that are observing him, who are, I think, technically the point of view through which this early part of the chapter, or this part of the chapter is looking at, that they are seeing Peter as a standard prisoner that they've seen hundreds of times before. This guy who's broken, has given up, is just waiting to die, and because we're kind of shielded from Peter's thoughts at first, we make that same assumption.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sure.
And I love this part here. Young princeling means to starve, thinks I, he said to Bessen. Good, Bessen replied indifferently. Spare us the trouble of keeping him. And speaking of keeping him, Matt, this is something we didn't really talk about last week because I think the book presented it so matter-of-factly that you just accept it. But this idea that this entire story from here on out hinges on the fact that despite Peter being found guilty and convicted of his crime, he will not be executed for it, right? He's committed both regicide and patricide, two of like the worst crimes that you can commit, especially in a place like this, and yet he lives. And it's not even a question. There's never anyone in the whole legal process of this that says, well, should we execute him maybe? It's just like, he's a prince, he's royalty, regardless of his crimes. We do not kill royals. We do not execute royals. Ergo, he just is going to be in prison for the rest of his life. It's not an option to do anything else.
Yeah, that is interesting. I guess I didn't think about that, but I think that is accurate to the sort of feudal era.
Yes.
Is the royals are simply another class of human being, and they don't, even when they misstep, they don't get the same punishments, because that would imply that you, the citizenry, might eventually want to execute the sitting king, and that should never cross your mind ever.
Yeah. So. God, it's amazing how much just a crazy house of cards a monarchy is. Like, if I would be terrified constantly if I was a king. I would be
Seriously.
Terrified.
Yeah. I mean, it's not really a safe or happy life for anyone.
No, I mean, certainly comparable to a serf in this time. They're living relatively good, but yeah, like from a psychological perspective, I'd be constantly looking over my shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, I think it basically drove them all crazy, like as a rule, actually.
Yeah, that and all the inbreeding.
Yeah, that too.
But we learn, of course, that Peter was not wallowing, but just thinking. We learn he was not starving himself, but just keeping himself hungry so his thoughts were clear. Matt, side note, science question. Is that how hunger works? I feel like I think worse when I'm really hungry.
It can work that way. Honestly, it's probably just there to seem more badass and dramatic.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, more seriously, like fasting. When you actually fast, you move past hunger into a space that is more like kind of spacious clarity. But
sure.
Can't really keep that up for too long. I like the idea though, like. It makes him seem, I was getting all these associations with like noble figures who have been imprisoned wrongly and then gone on hunger strikes. And this wasn't a hunger strike. He didn't have any agenda here. But yet again, it was kind of a way of painting Peter with this brush of nobility and innate kingliness.
Yeah, I mean he is consciously and deliberately withholding a necessity from himself, which paints him with an air of, you know, calm, self-controlled demeanor. You know, like
Yeah.
just the ability to avoid something you need is inherently kind of badass.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
yeah, he's awesome. God, this is like the Peter is a badass week. Like we'll just name this Peter is awesome week. Although I think no spoilers, but I think the rest of the book is going to be Peter is awesome month.
Exciting.
January is Peter is awesome month.
Sounds good.
Um, of course, we do learn that after this week of thinking, Peter has a plan, and we will get to that plan in a bit. But I love how Peter, after this week of thinking, has just kind of immediately come to every conclusion that Pena missed. You know, like he almost right away realizes who the actual guilty culprit is. He's like, of course, it has to be Flagg. Now, to be fair to Pena, Peter has the advantage of knowing with absolute certainty that he is innocent. You know, so it's a lot easier to find the actual guilty party when you know for sure that it's not you. And Pena doesn't have that luxury.
That is fair.
I love this part here though. But on the 8th day, Peter sent for Aaron Bessen and gave him a certain instructions, and he did not give them like a prisoner. He gave them like a king. So let's talk about, we kind of already, you know, preface this conversation, but let's talk about this kingliness of Peter. We've been told about this kind of certain kingly behavior. What does this mean in the context of the book? What does being kingly mean? Is it natural to him? Is this something he was just born with this, or was this just, you know, part of Sasha's influence over the first 5 years of his life? What do you think?
Well, I think we're meant to ask that question, and you know, I don't think we're meant to necessarily be able to jump to the answer. We can see the influence of nurture in specific instances, like his behavior concerning napkins.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I mean, all three of my children are different people, you know. So,
Sure.
like, I think a lot of personality is in fact just nature. So it's a fascinating question, obviously. Like that, I think we are. Do you lean a certain direction?
I don't know, because there's this line here that I pulled out that I want to talk about. It says, an injustice had been done. He discovered a strange thing. The fact that the injustice had been done to him didn't seem half as so important as the fact that it had been done at all. It ought to be righted. And I don't know, I'm probably wrong here, and this is, you know, layman's stuff. This feels like something that I don't know where that kind of thing comes from. I don't know where that kind of indifference towards the injustice done to him and just a larger standing out against injustice broadly. You know, is that something that is instilled in you by another person, or is that something that just kind of comes, you know, on your hard drive? I don't know. Honestly, like, if I'm being honest with myself, this feels like something that is just an innate quality of a person, and I don't understand why it feels that way to me, but that's what it does.
Yeah, I think we all have, to some degree, the urge to straighten pictures in strange hotel rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have it more than others, and some people have it sort of more generally than others, where I think we all feel upset when we are wronged. Some people feel upset when they see someone else wronged. And I think that's just, I think I agree with you that feels innate.
Yeah.
Can't prove it though.
Yeah, and if it is, then like where does that, like where does that come from? I mean, I think you're right that it is perhaps, you know, if we're just gonna get into science here, it's just like evolutionary advantageous for human beings to, you know, desire justice and to right wrongs in order to ensure the continued success of the species as a whole, because we are communal creatures. But I don't know the answer to this. My tangent of the week is that my son is starting to get teeth in, but also he's eating people food now. And I've watched my son with no teeth in his mouth. He's got like one little baby tooth on the bottom. When he eats meat, he puts the meat where his canines would be. And then when he rips it off, he puts it back where his molars would be to do that part. And I'm like, so that's got to be an instinctual thing, because there's no teeth there to do any of that work. That just has to be like an instinctual hard-coded thing in him, you know? And we're talking about something way more complicated here. We're talking about justice and morality, but I don't know. It's just, I've been thinking a lot about like the hard coding of humanity a lot. And I honestly, I don't want to believe that this is just innate, because then people just don't innately have this sometimes. And that's a depressing view of people, that like, well, you're sorry you lost the coin flip and you're just an asshole who doesn't care about justice, you know? But I don't know. There's the portion of the kingliness that certainly, as you said, does feel like Sasha, but there's a portion of this that just feels like this is just this dude. He's just a good dude.
I mean, the more I observe my children and I guess other people's children too, since sometimes my children play with other children, I realize how much of this stuff is like genetic wiring of stuff like altruism is not really learned.
Sure.
I mean, I think instantiations of it are learned, but it's a natural impulse. And just to throw a thought onto what you were saying about it being a coin flip that some people use. I mean, I think the way that nurture works into it is, let's say that two people start out with the same exact genetic propensity toward caring about the fairness of a situation, even if it doesn't concern them. But then one of them has, some series of terrible things happen to them where the lesson that they learn is basically like, look out for number one, make sure that nobody's taking advantage of you, be suspicious of others. And the consequence will be that their instinct to, fight for justice when they see injustices will be severely muted and maybe even totally extinct because they've been mistreated by life. And that's just kind of my little cartoon picture of how the nature versus nurture dynamic can work there. You could even argue that Thomas is one such person. Like he seems to have had these impulses, these pro-social loving impulses, and they've either been sort of unfortunately just by fate not encouraged or whatever. And then of course there's Flagg just actively discouraging it.
Yeah. So I guess what you're saying kind of is that nature can be nurtured.
Yeah. Or squashed.
Yeah. No, I like that. I don't know if we solved anything with that conversation, but it was fun to have.
Sure.
I guess we solved the fact of my son is using molars that do not exist. It's wild.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's like, do you or I bite with our canines because we actually expect them to have more gripping power, or is that just something that we just do because we just do it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's fascinating. Watching children grow is the most fascinating thing in the world.
It really is.
All right, we now officially meet Aaron Bessen, the warder of the prison, who does not take kindly to the kingly requests / demands Peter makes on the 8th day. What do you think, to go into our biblical references again, the fact that it's the 8th day is also pretty important, right? Like, in 7 days, Peter makes his own universe, and on the 8th day, he gets to work. I don't know. There's something great about that to me.
Yeah, right. It's just one of these touches that makes him seem more like a mythical, larger than human figure.
Yeah. One thing I'm always paying close attention to here, though, Matt, is where King chooses to reveal things and where he doesn't. And it's really interesting we see here, because we don't actually see what Peter's requests to Pena are until much later in this chapter. To Pena, I guess technically, to Bessen, but also to Pena. We don't actually see what these requests are till much later in the chapter, when he actually writes them down, and when Pena reads the note written by Peter. That's the moment that he finally reveals what the requests are. But of course, all the characters we're dealing with have seen these requests as they're being communicated. Why do you think King chose to kind of structure that this way, where we've seen so much of what happens to Peter throughout this book so far before it actually happens? But in this instance, he chooses to mask those requests until the 11th hour.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it would have been distracting if he told us that up front, because then we would be impatient with the stuff with Bessen. We'd be wanting to see, hey, what's going to happen with the dollhouse? What is this? Whereas this way we get to just focus on this conflict with the jailer. I think King usually only does the thing where he intentionally spoils us on things where we're at least, reading the thing that's going to lead directly to seeing how that event occurred.
Sure.
Whereas this would be, we would be impatient with this if he had done that.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. I think the other thing I like about it here is one of the things we know is that the requests that he's making somehow have to do with a plan for escape, right? Like we're not told what those requests are, but we are told in this moment that they have something to do with a plan that he's come up with to escape from the tower. And I think it's fun because by denying us what those requests actually are, it kind of puts us in this position where we're seeing Peter super confident that his escape is going to be successful without knowing the details of it yet. And so it automatically kind of spurs doubt in the reader. Like there's this wonderful line that I'm thinking of in the book where like the narrator says, you might be thinking that Peter is putting the cart before the horse because it's a really fucking tall tower and it's completely straight and there's no way down. And he's already thinking about what he would do after he escapes. And so by, kind of shielding the plan from us until he has to, we're kind of emotionally put in that mode where even if we're in a story where we know, we can assume that he will most likely be successful because he's like, the story's not just going to be, and then Peter stayed in the tower forever and the end. It kind of puts us in this emotional mode where we're coming to his plan doubting it already, and I think that's kind of where King wants you.
Yeah, I like that. It's a good explanation.
So Peter challenged Bessen directly, and because of that, things devolve into a physical fight, and we see our young prince, who hasn't eaten in a week, just kicks the absolute shit out of this guy, though he is left with a scar on his cheek, a scar that goes all the way down his cheek. And the text makes, several moments to really point out that the scar. So I wanted to point this out to you and kind of get your opinion on it.
It is really interesting. It stuck out to me because in contrast to all this stuff about him being kingly and this Aragorn figure of, kind of almost perfection, he has this undignified scar. It's a scar on his face, which is not like a noble place to have a scar. And he didn't get it fighting a dragon or a vampire. He got it from the dirty, disgusting fingernail of this odious turnip, as he calls him. And I thought that was an interesting choice here. And I don't know if I even understand it and don't know what to make of it yet. And I wonder if it'll come into play in some specific way. It's very interesting, though. Yeah,
I think I kind of want to hold my opinions on it for a little while longer. Not that I'm saying it's definitely going to come into play some way, but I think it's a better thing to talk about when we've seen kind of the full scope of the book. But I think you're onto something, definitely, that it is coming from this, nothing heroic. It is, and it is a blotch on the perfectness that is King Peter. Right. I think it's really interesting. So after getting his ass kicked and getting knocked unconscious, Bessen finally relents and agrees to give Peter his favors in exchange for some cash. But of course, we learn that Peter doesn't have any money. So for that, he needs to go to his old friend, Punchless Pilot, Pena. I love this part right here. And more important, Bessen felt little or no fright when the name of King Thomas the Lightbringer was invoked. Like almost everyone else in Delain, Bessen had already begun to view Thomas with a certain contempt. But Pena was different. It goes on to say Pena was a more earthly being.
Yeah.
First of all, this is 8 days into Thomas's reign, and almost everyone in Delain is already viewing him with certain contempt. So, dang. But I think on top of that is this we've been circling around this idea, this entire book, about the ways in which royalty, aristocracies, nobility interacts with the lower class of people, right? And the ways in which there is this weird segregation between them and separation between them that is like unbreakable in some ways. And I love this idea that like the concept of a king is so far removed from the everyday life of a person like Bessen that like the whims of a king almost don't matter to him. He doesn't care. Like King Thomas is not a person. He's an idea. He's a concept. Pena is real and can actually in everyday life impact him. And so he's not afraid of the king because that's not a real thing in his life. But here, Pena, this is a guy. This is a guy.
Yeah, right. He's the guy who's going to give the order that gets you thrown into dungeon.
Yeah.
Whereas Thomas is the figurehead, and a figurehead with remarkably bad PR apparently.
It is. I mean, it is remarkable the ways in which this book kind of circles around this idea of how monarchy and royalty and commoners actually interact with each other, what those interactions actually look like. And I don't think it's a thing you typically see in this type of story. I think this is like the king's spin on a high fantasy story, is he's really interested in attacking these lines of communication and cooperation and community between monarchistic figures and the rest of the people.
I agree. I mean, it's funny because the closest analog that I can think of is something like Game of Thrones.
Sure. Yeah.
Where in fact almost every character in Game of Thrones is some kind of noble.
Yeah.
In a proportionality sense, this book spends more time with characters like the Stodds or the butler, and or even Bessen, the horrible jailer.
Yeah.
These are characters that the story is very concerned with, spends a lot of time understanding their relationship with these extremely powerful, authoritarian figures of the monarchy, and even the figure like Pena, who is part of that apparatus.
Yeah, and I mean, how much do these like the monarchy or Pena, like every single bit of story in this book so far hinges upon these common people, right? Like Peter's guilt is decided by common people, and Peter's method of escape is decided by common people. Had Bessen not relented to do this, had Ben not been loyal to him, had Dennis not agreed, every moment of this plot is entire. Like, yes, Peter is incredibly brave and kingly and wonderful and perfect and everything, but like, he is at the mercy of these people. And so it is kind of, I think one of the things, we'll get to this in a bit, but like the key to Peter's success or failure in this whole thing is the loyalty of the people underneath him. And I think that is a commentary on how this whole system works, that, the monarchy is supposed to be the power, but they are completely at the whim of the powerless.
Yeah. I think that's a fascinating dynamic, which is, extremely evident throughout history, but is rarely something that comes up in a story of this nature. So It's really cool.
So we move over to Pena himself and see that the Chief Justice is already beginning to have some doubts of Peter's guilt. I really love these almost played as comedy scenes going on between Bessen and Pena's butler, who barely recognizes him because he's just been beaten so badly. Like, he's at some point he's like legitimately convinced that this guy must be a dwarf. And like, it's so, speaking of the interesting class dynamics, like we have this, like these are people that are technically at the same level. I don't know how like the hierarchical system in this place actually works. I guess technically the butler of not a royal, but I guess you'd say Pena is nobility, I guess, right? He's pretty high up there to be like the main law dude in the land, right?
I honestly don't know, but he's at least upper class.
Yeah, but and then we have his servant basically is incredibly disgusted by this, even further down underclass. The warder of the prison is probably pretty low on the totem pole, and he's pretty disgusted by him and convinced that he's a dwarf. I don't know, there's just something really interesting about their interaction.
Yeah, I love it. I thought it was really entertaining. Particularly the voices that Bronson Pinchot does for the audiobook for these characters. They really emphasize the distinction between the way these characters speak, like, the extremely kind of lower class versus the extremely refined and imperious way that Pena speaks.
Sure.
It's really good.
So we see finally the letter that Peter has written to Pena, and it's wonderful. I'd read the whole thing if I can, but I think the only thing that is most important is the opening and closing statements. I love this. Pena, I have decided to live. And then he concludes the letter with, I did not murder my father. And, you know, I still think it remains ridiculous how many people are judging Peter's guilt or innocence on a crime based off like his actions or his demeanor. But damn, does that sound like an innocent fucking man, you know?
Yeah, I mean, as Pena himself notes, Peter doesn't really spend any time at all persuading or acting like he's worried about whether he'll be believed. He just states it. It's very, yet again, very kingly.
Yeah, I mean, the I did not murder my father is almost a non sequitur in the letter, right? It's like it has nothing to do with the content of the letter. It's just a thing he adds on the end. It's just like, oh, by the way,
Yeah.
I'm innocent.
Okay, just informing you, you know, which it's funny because that's actually all he needs to say, because once that kind of worm of suspicion that maybe he didn't kill his father is planted in Pena's mind, that's kind of all that needs to happen for Pena to start thinking, well, hold on a second, what if he didn't?
Yeah. I also really love that I have decided to live too, because it places his fate squarely in his hands, right? Like this is a man that's been imprisoned and he is kind of taking back the reins of his own life. I have decided to live. You cannot do this. This is mine. It's so fucking powerful. It's great.
Yeah, it is.
So Pena agrees to the stipulations. He has one requirement of his own. He wants to know what the two requests Peter has, and so we finally get to see the two requests. Here they are. 1, I want to have my mother's dollhouse. It always took me to pleasant places and pleasant adventures, and I loved it much as a boy. 2, I would like to have a napkin brought with my meals, a proper royal napkin. The crest may be removed, if you like. I don't know if you reacted this way, but I distinctly remember the first time I read this book getting like a huge smile on my face as soon as I saw this. The way King has kind of definitively established that both Peter's ongoing demand for napkins at every meal and his fascination with Sasha's dollhouse would matter to the plot in some significant way, it was just delightful. And to see it, like, you may not have completely figured out the plan yet, but like it immediately starts your wheels turning. It's just, I don't know. It's just like, it's really delightful.
I mean, rest assured, I did not immediately figure out the plan, but it did feel like things are being brought together in a satisfying way.
Yeah. I don't know if he wants you to necessarily completely put the plan together at this moment, but because he's laid the seeds that, that, the dollhouse and Flagg's decision to not care about Peter's continued involvement in the dollhouse is going to matter in some way, and the thing with the napkins is going to matter in some way, because we see these two things. We know, we're like, oh, here it is, and there's that little dopamine hit of satisfaction when the author allows you to go, here's what we're okay, I gotcha.
Yeah. And yet again, this is a thing that would not have meant anything to us if King hadn't stepped outside of the narrative and with the narrator voice said, pay attention.
Yeah, definitely. I really love this part. There was another thought wrapped up inside this, as neatly as filling is wrapped up in a tart. It was a thought Pena hardly dared to entertain. Just if, Peter had not murdered his father, who did that leave? Why, the person who had originally owned that hideous poison, of course. A person who had been nothing to the kingdom, who would have been nothing to the kingdom if Peter had followed his father. A person who was nearly everything now that Thomas sat on the throne in Peter's place. Flagg. But this thought was hideous to Pena. It suggested that justice had somehow gone wrong, and that was bad. But it also suggested that the simple logic in which he had always prided himself had been washed away in the revulsion that he had felt at the sight of Peter's tears. And this idea, the idea that he had made the single most important decision in his career on the basis of emotion rather than fact, was much worse. So this kind of circles around what we've been talking about with Pena, but I just love the Pena's ability to understand the stuff and still kind of try to push it away,
Yeah. I still don't think he'll be able to push it away. Like,
yeah,
I think the seed is planted, but I think he's in a position where he can't act openly against Flagg. I think it is, yet again, we're introducing this theme in the story of like loyalty and then like, well, what do you do once you realize that you have been disloyal, like that's something that keeps happening in the story. Basically, like with the butlers, with Pena, with various other characters, is the idea that they behave disloyally out of concerns that seem rational in the moment, and then later regret it severely.
Yeah.
Which is way more. It's just a really interesting concept to tackle.
Yeah, and there's also this really interesting examination of systemic flaws in this kingdom, right? And this general idea that someone like Pena is so, attached and to this system of justice that is in place in the kingdom. Like it is his whole life. It is what he does. That the idea that system is broken or ineffective or got it wrong is almost beyond the pale for him. And I think this is something that is true in real life as well, right? There are people that spend their entire life, in the criminal justice system and believe in that system. And I think there's a lot of good people in that system that firmly believe in the goodness and the quality of that system. But when you get so attached to the system itself, you are unable to see the ways in which that system is flawed. And I do think that's something that this book is looking at. Obviously, a monarchy is a pretty flawed system of government, and I think we're exploring that. And so Pena here is almost unable to admit that his justice system could possibly have gotten it wrong, because how could that be? It's the system. How could the system get it wrong? No.
Yeah, that's an interesting take there. I think the authoritarian apparatus of the monarchy or just of the whole system as it stands, and how it is self-reinforcing, and how blind it is to its own flaws, is indeed one of the things that we're looking at. I think that works into what you just described works into that overall theme really well.
Yeah, and I think anyone that represents a system in this kind of way is going to be a little bit more conservative about the system, right? Because like if you're a representative of the system, your job is to maintain it, right? And so it's almost by requirement that changes to that system must come from an exterior force in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a imprisoned prince or something. I don't know.
Something, I don't know. Just to pick something random.
So then we then cut over to Ben Stodd, and this is of course Peter's best friend. And as you predicted last week, Matt, King is going to dive into what it's like to be the best friend of the prince who has been convicted of killing his father. And we see here that it's not a great life, man. It's not great.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time dwelling on how not a great life it is.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad that we got to see this, because this just felt like an area really ripe for conflict that I felt sure King would pay attention to.
Yeah. We see right away, speaking of loyalty, that Ben retains Peter's innocence and he remains loyal to him, despite the fact that everyone is telling him not to, despite the fact that his father gets mad at him and beats him for it. And then we kind of focus on Ben's father a bit here. His father, who, unlike Ben, kind of understands what being publicly loyal to a murdering prince would do for both the family and for him specifically. I love this line here. So, because he loved his son and was afraid for him, he had struck him and threatened to drive him from the house if Ben ever mentioned the prince by name again. People are funny sometimes.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that basically the first thing that we saw of Ben's father was to do this pretty, from our perspective, senselessly monstrous thing by just knocking his son down cruelly for mentioning Peter's name. But then we loop back and go and see like what his day was like, and we come to understand Anders Stodd really well.
Yeah, and what it has been like to be the Stodds. I love, we kind of get a brief 3-page history of the life of the Stodds, and people that have a saying that they're the luck of the Stodds, right? They're very unlucky people, and Ben kind of becoming friends with Peter was supposed to be their luck changing, and then of course Peter gets convicted and all that changes.
Before we move on from talking about introducing the Stodds, I just want to mention that my dumb brain thought that when I forgot their last name was Stodd, and so whenever the audiobook reader said Ben Stodd, I thought he was saying like Ben's Da. like I thought, hey, it's Midworld, maybe they just say Da. So it's like, yeah. So and then Ben's Dodd went and did this, and I'm like focusing a lot on Ben's dad.
When does Ben get to do stuff?
Yeah, when is Ben going to do something? Yeah,
that's really funny. The flaws of audiobook reading. It's a wonderful way to absorb books, but certainly not perfect.
This is definitely a unique and novel flaw.
I mean, we've talked about this before, but I think actually King has said this before, that like it's weird the way your brain takes in information differently when you read versus when you listen, you know, because I'm behind on the audiobook for this one, but even, you know, back on the Dark Tower books, I would sometimes read the section and then I would listen to it. And I always found like different things jumped out at me differently on each of those.
Yeah. And, you know, vice versa, certain things.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even perceive consciously in one medium, but then they seem really, you know, great in the other medium.
Yeah.
Do you remember, or, you know, to the listeners as well, in On Writing, I believe King talks about paying his kids to read books into tape so that he could take the tapes on his walks. And like, I remember this blew my mind because it's like, number one, it shows you how much King actually enjoys audiobooks. Number two, I can't help but see this as King very cleverly training his children in what he saw as an important part of the craft of storytelling, which is the literal telling, the speaking, the understanding what is emphasized and how to say it. And like a very high proportion of his children went on to become writers. So I can't help but see that as being part of what he sees as the skill of writing, is the skill of writing something and knowing how it will sound when it's read aloud.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think I loved that little anecdote that he gives in that book. And I think the cynical take on that is, oh, geez, you're putting your kids to work. But I'm sure they loved it. And yeah, you know, garnered a amazing respect for the telling of stories. I think I don't like audiobooks have become, I'm not sure if I can confidently say, I think in some ways it's bigger than physical book sales now. I don't know if like overall it is, but like it's a huge market that is a huge part of publishing now. And I think it's really important that it has a person like King who is like outspokenly in love with the power of audiobooks. And like imagine an author as popular and big as Stephen King like being like, yeah, no, it's not real reading, you know, reading is reading, audiobooks aren't like that, like that he is outspokenly positive about it. It's good for the industry, and it's good for people who wouldn't be reading otherwise unless they're listening to audiobooks.
Yeah. Well, and he's the people's writer, so it would be hard for me to imagine him being against such a popular part of the medium.
Yeah, you are correct. Yeah. So then we get to see that Ben learns the consequences of the friendship pretty quickly as he is beaten for his friendship with Peter. But importantly, even through the beating, he remains his loyalty. And I think it's fair to say at this point, we've talked about this already this week, but loyalty is definitely one of the motifs of the story. And not just loyalty to the crown in this abstract political way, right? But like this specific personal loyalty. And what's more, the belief in something or someone despite evidence, right? Ben is now believing in Peter in the same way that Peter believed in that injured horse. Peter looked at this injured horse that everyone else would have said, no, he's dead, kill him, get rid of him, he's dead, he's gone. And he believed that horse could recover. And now Ben looks at Peter and looks at his guilt and says, no, I believe, despite evidence to the contrary, I believe that this is true. And so I'm going to take steps to help.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think, you know, when we say a sentence like, you know, loyalty is a theme in the story, it's like, well, there's a lot of complex ways that theme weaves its way through things. And definitely, I like what you're saying here about Ben's loyalty. I mean, I think you could even say the theme throughout the story is both loyalty and the absence of loyalty, and the consequence of both having loyalty and the consequence of lacking loyalty.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the way this plays out, right? Because I do think Pena feels that he is being loyal to the crown, as an institution, as a system, right? Like everything he was doing in his mind, I'm sure that is his version of loyalty. And I think the same with Dennis. Like I do think Dennis was disloyal to Peter in a specific way, but I also feel like he was loyal to the system, you know?
Yeah, well, I think maybe that's the idea there is trusting the impersonal, inhuman system over what you sort of know by the evidence of your own senses to be the truth. Like you spent your whole life more or less raising this boy. You know his character, and then basically because you're scared and you're suspicious, you discount all of that and you say, well, it really doesn't seem like him, and never would have predicted this, but the mysterious box did have the mysterious poison in it, and that's all I need.
Yeah. I think loyalty to a system is much easier than loyalty to a person.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also, I almost don't want to give them that out. Like I want to say it. In both of their cases, there was a big element of saving their own skin present, and by both of them, I mean both the Butlers and Pena. There's a big element of like, all right, we've got to staunch the bleeding. I've got to protect, my livelihood, my existence. The fastest way to do that is to put this kid in the dungeon. And I mean, I'm not saying you don't have a point. I'm saying that there was definitely an element of fear driving their actions. And I'm beginning to see that as a major king throughout major theme throughout all of King's works is the idea that people turn into monsters when they're afraid.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of joking when I made the Pontius Pilate joke about Pena earlier in the episode, but that is a definite similarity there where, Pilate wasn't fully sold that this Jesus guy was guilty and deserved the things that the crowd was demanding, but it was safer to relent to what the people wanted. It would preserve the system and preserve his own place in that system. And so he washed his hands of it. He said, okay, fine. And there is definitely some of that in Pena for sure.
Yeah. Right.
All right. So, I mean, I think there is something important to it. Like, I love this part right here where Pena meets with Ben. Ben is called in, and we didn't talk about this specifically, but basically Pena cannot be seen giving money to help support favors for the king. So they're going to go through a third party, and the third party that Peter suggests is his best friend, Ben. So that's why Ben is kind of being looped into this whole thing. And so he's called in with Pena, and I love this part here. Pena says, I would guess that you're already paying for that friendship. And Ben says, without any hesitation, I would pay such a price 100 times over. So I think one of the other things, speaking of this idea of loyalty, is loyalty is difficult sometimes and has consequences, and I think that's part of this whole idea that it's harder. That it's being loyal when everyone else is not is hard, and yet Ben, like I think we are shown Ben as this aspirational figure who is loyal despite everything.
Yeah. He's definitely sort of our current best example of loyalty in a positive sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that Ben is, as a quality as a person as the great kingly Peter is so far.
Yeah, maybe they kind of rubbed off on each other, and it's interesting to consider who, chicken or egg there. Like is
Sure.
Part of the reason why Peter is so great is because he had a friend as good as Peter and as Ben, I mean, and then is Ben as stand up as he is because he had the friend of, I mean, I think the answer is both. I think when you have, I think friends are capable of kind of sharpening each other in that way. So.
Yeah. So basically, the result of this whole thing is that Peter gets the two things he wants, both the napkins and the dollhouse. There's this one little bit in here that I just wanted to give your thoughts on. Not much we can do with it right now, but King has a say. We move over to the storeroom where the napkins are stored in, and then King takes the time to do this. We'll speak more of this room later. Let me tell you now only that all would have been struck with wonder at the sight of it, and Peter in particular. For had he known of this room, which Dennis took completely for granted, he might have attempted his escape as much as 3 years sooner, and much, for better or for worse, might have been changed. So any idea what's up with the storage room?
Not really. I'm kind of, for some reason, just assuming that it's not like the obvious, because like the first thing that jumped to mind is like a whole bunch of bed sheets. And it's like, then Peter could ask for, I need royal bed sheets. And it's like, that seems obvious and not really satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
So presumably, something that could help him escape, but not something terribly obvious. I tried to think about it for a bit. I couldn't think of anything.
All right. Well, that's fun. We'll circle back around to that before the end for sure. So we do get to see that 30 days into Thomas's new reign, it's not going well, Matt. I love this line here. Also by then, Thomas the Lightbringer had signed into law the farmer's tax increase, which quickly became known as Tom's Black Tax. The new joke told in meat houses and wine shops was the king would soon be changing his royal name to Thomas the Taxbringer. The increase was not 8%, which might have been fair, or 18%, which might have been bearable, but 80%.
Dear God.
Yeah.
Flagg seems to have really accelerated his timeline for ruining the kingdom.
Yeah, and I love this little bit here. We're told that the reason, his justification for this is that the farmers are underreporting their crops, so we have to keep the tax that high to make sure we're getting the piece of the yield that they're not reporting. Which I this is not the first time we've seen that, actually. If we go back to the Wind Through the Keyhole, where Flagg played the tax man in that story, right? This idea of excessive taxation. I think this is a really fun link directly back to that story.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's funny. I actually kind of thought you were going to reference Wizard and Glass, where the people of Hambry like really kind of resent the idea that they owe anything at all to Gilead, because they're like, we're so far away, you're just taking horses for what have you done for us?
Yeah, I can't remember what the formal agreement was called between Gilead and the other.
Yeah, I forget the word. It was some kind of
some old agreement that like Gilead was barely keeping up its bargain for, because it just didn't have people to send to these distant places anymore. What was the name of it? I can't think of it. That's okay.
I don't remember.
No, I mean that's great too. I think this is all kind of connected in this idea of the tax man is the bad guy always in these kind of stories.
And what's funny is now we realize that literally Flagg was Stephen Deschain's evil wizard counselor.
Yeah.
So could very well have been advocating for the same exact terrible policies.
I would hope Stephen Deschain was smarter than putting an 80% tax on crops.
I would hope so. Although at this point, I just am extremely confused about how people in Midworld, why they allow there to be evil wizard counselors at all, since they have all these stories.
That's fair. Very fair. I mean, I think it's like he's, I don't know, like why does any story in any world allow a wizard counselor? Because they can do magics, and it's like, oh fuck, you do magic shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the serious answer, if I'm going to attempt a serious answer, is like they have inveigled themselves. I don't know how to say that word. They have situated themselves in a place where they can't be easily gotten rid of, and they're sort of, it's just the power behind their throne character really does have power in his own way. So
yeah, I mean, outside of wizards, like it is kind of remarkable how often these kind of stories have the snake-tongued advisor to the crown being the source of the badness. I think it probably comes from stories in the time, like being maybe not unable, but concerned about outright stating the king's a bad guy. So it's a way of kind of saying, well, yeah, the king did bad things, but it's not the monarchy's fault. You can write stories that hold up the monarchy still while also explaining the badness that happens.
I mean, that's super cynical. I love it, because it kind of implies that like even a story like The Eyes of the Dragon can be viewed as a kind of justification for monarchy, because it's saying, yeah, there were some problems in Delain, but don't worry about it. They were all caused by this one super evil monster. And then Peter, the rightful king, yeah, I'm making some assumptions here. Peter, the rightful king, eventually came and took his throne, and then it was all great, as it should be with the rightful king and his throne. Three
Yeah.
cheers for the king, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you're right that it is cynical, but not inaccurate. I don't know. I don't know.
In this particular case, yes.
Mm-hmm. So I really particularly like this scene where Ben arranges for himself to be one of the two that actually is going to deliver the dollhouse to Peter, just so he can see his old friend and give him this note that confirms his, forever standing loyal to him. There is something interesting here that I want to focus on, because there's this line, "Don't tell your father of this," Ben cautioned Dennis. "Why not?" Dennis had asked. "I tell my old dad almost everything. Don't you?" "I did," Ben said, remembering how his father had forbidden him to mention Peter's name anymore in the house. "But when boys grow up, I think that sometimes changes. However that may be, you mustn't tell him of this, Dennis. He might tell Pena, and then I'd be in a hot pot on a high fire." "All right," Dennis promised. It was a promise he kept. So this is, a person telling a son to lie to his father, right? And this is something, back in Low Men in Yellow Coats, we discussed that, hey, that's a red flag. If someone ever tells your child not to tell you something, instruct that child to tell you that thing immediately, right? But here, we've already talked about how this book kind of circles around these concept of loyalty and different kinds of loyalty. And this is, I think, an example, and to me, of loyalty that goes beyond existing systems and existing hierarchy. Like, for example, the father-son hierarchy, right? Like this is a kind of loyalty that transcends that stuff. That loyalty that is almost by definition irrational and illogical.
Yeah, I mean, I think true loyalty of this variety can be thought of more as love.
Sure.
And that this is something more specific to a specific person. This isn't like loyalty to the crown. This is loyalty to the specific dear friend who is beloved to them, and love doesn't end because of the inconvenience or risk associated with it.
Sure. I mean, isn't it interesting though that kind of loyalty requires a kind of disloyalty, that it's like, in order to be loyal to Peter, Ben and Dennis must be disloyal to their fathers.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I like what you said a bit ago about maybe it would be more accurate to say that this is more a story about having principles and sticking to your principles.
Yeah.
Rather than merely sticking to your loyalty, because when loyalties conflict, I mean, this is the problem with living by virtues and saying like, one must be virtuous. It's like, okay, well, sometimes being honest conflicts with being fair, and sometimes being fair conflicts with being kind.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, I think it's just a matter of seeing that a wrong has been done and an injustice has been done, and helping Peter to right this injustice is more important than being honest with your father.
Yeah, and I think that is, to go back to this, the forever story we're talking about with Stephen King of stories of growing up. Like, that is definitely something, as you enter into adulthood, you realize that like conflicting loyalty is a complicated thing, and it's like doing the right thing sometimes requires you to be disloyal in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just, so this is it's not a tangent, but I have nothing more to say about this other than I love it to death, because there's this wonderful scene where Peter finally gets everything. He's got his napkins, he's got his dollhouse, and Bessen walks in there and says, "Well, you have it now, my good little princeling," Bessen said. "What shall we bring you next? Little ruffly dresses? Silk underpants?" Peter turned slowly and looked at Bessen. After a moment, Bessen dropped his eyes. It's just like this wordless dressing down of him that I'm not even going to dignify that with a response, because I know I've beaten you. It's like, God, it's so wonderful. Like every time these guards and warders like try to talk down to Peter and try to like belittle him, they're met with this wall of assurity, and they cannot breach it.
Yeah, it is simply badass.
Yeah. You can't make a dog when someone is a god,
Yeah, that's great.
So Matt, we get to this part, and I have to ask, did you to this part right here? By now, I am sure you have guessed Peter's plan of escape, because you know a good deal more than Pena did when he read Peter's requests. But in any case, the time has come to tell you straight out. So did you guess?
No, I'm an idiot. No. Yeah, I mean, my first when he does tell us that he's going to make a rope out of napkins, my first thought was like, this isn't going to work, right? Like, how tall is this spire anyway? Like,
Very tall. Very tall.
I was literally, so like my first or second thought was like, this is going to be one of those things where he spends 5 years working on a rope, and then like on the night where he's going to try to use the rope, some unusual thing happens and he escapes by some other means, because that would never work. But I mean, it's it's a fairy tale kind of story, so it's entirely possible that the rope plan will actually work.
Yep. The rope plan is to take strands of the napkins he gets every day and weave those strands together with the tiny loom that is inside the dollhouse, which was set up, Matt. Everything in there works, remember? King took the time to tell us everything in there works. And yeah, of course, we learned that it's 5 strands of napkin per napkin because he doesn't want to take more because they'll be noticed. So like, I think 15 strands a day because he gets 3 napkins a day. And like, it's like this arduous, like we learn basically 5 years, right? Like we don't know exactly when he's going to get out, but we're going to be told 5 years go by. Yeah. And that's a lot.
That's a lot of sitting there hunched over a tiny little dollhouse and a tiny little loom.
I love this thematically, though, because speaking of loyalty, with this thing we've been talking about all episode, this is Peter's loyalty to the principles with which he was established by Sasha, right? Like the key to this whole thing is that his mother instilled a thing upon him, which was never eat without a napkin. Never do it, Peter. Never, ever, ever, ever do it. And so he took that seriously. And so when he has a request to have napkins with every meal, nobody thinks that's weird, because that's Peter. And so it is his principled stand. And you were talking about principles before, and I do think this is exactly where this goes in. It is his principled stand to the things that he believes are right, that offer the key to his escape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love it.
So the story now moves us forward in time, telling us basically of Peter's 5 years in the Needle and this rope he slowly weaved. There's a few things I wanted to pick out here as we kind of just wrap up this week's reading. The first is this throwaway reference. We learn that Peter gets very sick and almost dies one day, and he is having fever dreams, and he sees his father, and we get this. "Father," Peter shrieked. His voice was powerful, and below him the warders, Bessen included, quailed, thinking that Peter must be seeing the smoking, murdered ghost of King Roland come to take Peter's soul to hell. They made no more wagers that night, and in fact one of them went to the Church of the Great Gods the very next day and embraced his religion again, and eventually became a priest. This man's name was Curran, and I may tell you of him in another story. This is where I unfortunately have to say, Matt, that this is not like a clever way of King sneaking one of his other stories into here in a reference. As far as I know, the story of Curran the priest does not exist anywhere. But I do like that this is just like this little sprinkling of story flavor on our text here. The idea that this world is absolutely packed with stories. There are stories everywhere, but we're only being told one of them today. It's very Dark Tower,
It sure is. I mean, I was glad to know that, Curran is not just a sort of midworld pronunciation of Callahan, and that in fact Callahan went to Earth and became a Catholic priest.
That would be interesting.
That would be a twist.
It certainly would. I just, this next part here, I just really love. I love the writing. But how am I to tell you about Peter's endless drudging work at that tiny loom? That tale is beyond me. All the hours spent, sometimes with frosty breath pluming from his mouth and nose, pluming, not plumbing, from his mouth and nose, sometimes with sweat running down his face, always in fear of discovery. All those long hours alone, with nothing but long thoughts and almost absurd hopes to fill them. I can tell you some things, and will, but to convey such hours and days of slow time is impossible for me, and might be impossible for anyone except one of the great storytellers whose race is long vanished. Perhaps the only thing that even vaguely suggests how much time Peter spent in these 2 rooms was his beard. When he came in, it was only a shadow on his cheeks and a smudge under his nose. A boy's beard. In the 1,825 days which followed, it grew long and luxuriant. By the end, it reached the middle of his chest, and although he was only 21, it was shot with gray. I just love this because like this idea that like the storyteller is like, I can't do this justice at all. I can't tell you a story that's as good as this. It's interestingly meta in this way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it is, it's trying to convey the weight of doing something this tedious for 5 years.
Yeah.
But you can't describe that without it being extremely tedious, other than to say, I can't possibly express how awful this was.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that like it is impossible to explain the tediousness of this thing. Like even if he explained it in a long, tedious way, like it's still not accurate to what it must have been like to spend 5 years every night working a tiny loom that you run with your thumb, and you're weaving together these tiny, tiny, tiny strings. Like I think you're right that it allows you to understand what it must have been like without him actually having to explain what it must have been like.
Yeah, exactly.
I also like the little bit of lore here. Like it might have been impossible except for one of the great storytellers whose race has long vanished. Like, is he talking about the old ones? Maybe. Who knows? It doesn't matter. It's just like some mystical race of super storytellers.
I still don't know if this is pre or post old ones because of the fact that the story doesn't care.
Sure.
But I mean, also that felt like a very like Tolkien beat right there.
Yeah.
The idea that like there's an ancient race of storytellers.
Yeah. What would that look? What was a race of storytellers look like?
I mean, perhaps it's not being literal, but in any case, the idea that there were like supernaturally good storytellers it's a very fun thought to just kind of sit with for a moment.
Sure.
With no other details than that.
Yeah, I also love the idea that his beard has gone prematurely gray.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what was the purpose of that? How did that happen?
I mean, maybe I don't know. Like that's a thing that you do to show that a character has been through trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and this sort of torture is a kind of trauma for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
That's all I got.
It can also, represent some wisdom.
Very true.
Yeah. So then we see, Peter continues to work on his rope, constantly measuring the tensile strength of it. And for our explanation of what tensile strength is, King recalls a time where Peter learned of breaking strain from our old friend Yosef. I love this bit here. Not very subtle, our Stephen King. Breaking strain, he said, is a good thing for a prince to know about. Peter, chains break if you put enough of a tug. And people do, too. Keep it in mind.
That's great.
I mean, it's really great because, like, who are we talking about here with breaking strain, right? Are we talking about Peter? Are we talking about Thomas? Are we talking about Pena? Like, it could be. I mean, the answer to that question is, I think, Flagg himself. I think the answer to that question is yes, right? Like, all of the above.
It's a very tense situation. Like, I think that's the going back to what we were saying about the system reinforcing itself. Like, the story is showing how fragile, how maybe this monarchy is tugged almost to the point of breaking strain. It's this unstable system that is only kept stable by brutality, and here we have Flagg kind of tugging on it from the side, not helping.
And that's where we leave the chapters for this week. We know Peter is continuing to work on his rope. I think the last bit of the last chapter this week is him, getting his first real measurement of how strong this thing is, and the rope is able to hold his weight, even though it's basically invisible. It's a very, very powerful weave he's got going on that thing.
It's magical royal napkin weave. One thing I forgot to mention as we were going through is just the idea that both brothers get dreams of Roland, their father.
True. Yeah.
Which if it were just one of them, I would just assume, people have nightmares, but since it's both of them, I'm inclined to think like maybe we're meant to think this is actually Roland's ghost speaking to his sons.
Yeah, it could be. In this world, you never know. And I mean, their dreams reflect their view of their father, right? Where Thomas is guilty. And to Peter, Roland comes to spur him on, to keep him going. To keep him like, I can't imagine. I can't imagine what this must have been like. 5 years. We know it's cold up there. Like it's so it's so fascinating to me that the things he asked for were so simple. Like he could have also said, "Oh, while you're bringing me the nice royal napkins, could you like get me slightly better food?" He didn't
Right.
ask for that, so he's getting the shitty food that is not very filling. The terribly overly salted bread, like he's getting all this terrible food.
Yep. He's just too much of a king to beg for better food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so that's going to do it for this week. Next week, we will continue the book as we read chapters 72 through, I believe it's 101, 72 through chapter 101. So I think that's our penultimate set of chapters there.
Perfect.
All right, so let's move on to our discussion question section. Matt, last week it was the final episode of 2021. So we asked you folks favorite Stephen King related thing of 2021. And we put an asterisk on this, Matt, which was
it can't be us or our podcast.
Please don't do that. And you know what? You guys fucking didn't listen.
A lot of rule breakers out there.
A lot of rule breakers and a lot of rule benders. And I just want to say at the top here, we're not doing that because like we don't like when people say nice things to us. It's just it feels a little weird to ask a question in which the response is praise to you, it just feels it feels like an English teacher giving an essay prompt that is tell me about your favorite English teacher.
Yeah, we might not be able to do this again, Scott, if they're going to keep breaking the rules.
I know. But we still got some great non-us related answers too. And the people that bended the rules bended them cleverly. So,
well, I appreciate cleverness at least.
Yes.
All right, let's get into it. So from all 84001, they say, my favorite King-related thing from the past year is, drumroll please, like the fireworks, cue the dancing gnomes, signal the piccolo pipers, release the doves. It's your goddamn podcast. Suck it, buttholes. You're not the boss of me. How dare you insist I change my answer? It was my answer last year, and it's my answer this year, and I'm glad and I'm honestly glad it makes you uncomfortable. Glad. I wonder if I'm glad. Deal with it. No, seriously, you lads brought me many hours of joy from the conclusion of the series I love through all the season 2 connected novels. It's been a fun and an insightful ride listening along this past year. Keep them coming. Cheers. Oh, thank you, all 84W001. You've been with us for this whole ride, haven't you?
Yeah, it's so fun. This is like we have a lot of question answering regulars, right, where we see every week, and then we have people that pop in every few episodes, and then I feel like every week we also have a person who is answering the question for the first time, or just a name I don't recognize, and that's delightful. It's so fun.
Yeah, it makes me happy.
Speaking of one of our regulars, here is Pear Jane, who says, I have two favorites. The first is my folio edition of Misery, the prize you awarded for winning the Do the King thing. It's been such a long time since I wrote any fiction, and I didn't realize how much I missed writing until I put my hands back on the keyboard. So much that I wrote a second one since. Oh, wow, that's awesome. It's been a difficult year on many fronts for me, and having the one thing that felt all mine, something I could share with so many other King nerds, was truly a bright spot. Well, it was a great little story, Pear, so thank you.
Yeah. I mean, we all loved it, obviously.
Yeah. And then they go on to say, speaking of King nerds, this time last year, my sister and I began watching CBS's The Stand on Saturday mornings together, texting as we watched 500 miles apart. I'd already gotten her hooked on Kingslingers. And yes, you are still one of my favorite King things. Damn it, Jane. You were doing so good. Growing up, we spent much of our time together watching movies, TV shows, reading the same books, and talking about them until the wee hours. After The Stand ended, we decided to co-watch the original miniseries, which even with its 90s miniseries aesthetic, is metaverses better than the 2020 debacle. I agree with that. And then we watched Return to Salem's Lot, which is a terrible and funny, and Sleepwalkers, which is apeshit bizarre, as I remember from seeing it in the theater. We haven't always had time to watch movies on Saturday morning, but after 20 years of living apart, we finally managed to make time every week or so for a good hour-long convo that's often 80% movies or books. She was my first reader on Tallulah's Cab Ride, and she bought the Monster Squad tee for Christmas last year. This year, I bought her an overlooked July 4th photograph with her face photoshopped into it. Etsy is the greatest. I gotta get you one of those, Matt. I gotta get you.
That's delightful.
She was the first member of my quartet, or maybe I was hers, and she has 2 years on me. This year, Stephen King's work helped reforge our kef, which has always creeped out most folks who spend more than 20 minutes with us. MOON, that spells sister. That's very sweet. And I believe Jane's sister is Baby Can You Dig Your Sam, which is another one of our constant question answerers. So
that's amazing.
yeah.
This makes me very happy. This sounds like my relationship with my brother, except if anything, y'all are doing an even better job. So.
Yeah, why don't you and your brother watch movies every Saturday morning, Matt?
And text each other? I don't know. It sounds like a really good idea, to be honest.
Doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Doing it wrong.
Shit. All right. Next, the Amazing Duck 42 says, my favorite King related thing this year was the fact that through your podcast, I rediscovered my joy of reading. My life has been stressful over the last few years, and I'd regrettably fallen out of the reading and writing habit. I hadn't read anything longer than a short story in probably 3 years, and hadn't written anything for my own pleasure for even longer than that. But by some twist of Ka, I found the podcast, and you dug into these familiar stories with such delight that I couldn't help but want to be part of the fun. Rereading Old King turned into picking up the King I'd missed out on during my hiatus, turned into, again, spending more time reading anything I can get my hands on, King or not. So thank you guys for facilitating that rediscovery. Also, Chapel Wait was great. Worms are blamed for all issues in my house, big and small. Stub your toe? Worms got in the way. Overcooked dinner? Distracted by worms. Too many worms in the compost? Probably the vampires, then, actually.
I'll allow this answer. It's technically rule breaking.
But it makes me so happy that
yes,
I mean, I've definitely had periods of my life where I didn't read very much at all, and those always seem in retrospect like dark times.
yeah. The joy of this is that like I read a lot on my own, but like this kind of structured read really helps keep me going when I'll have months where I like read like 6 books in a month, and I'll have months where I'll just read whatever we're reading for Kingslingers and the book club book, and that's it, so I love having the structure there, and having I've followed podcasts like ours in the past where they got me to read stuff that I wouldn't have kept up with, and it's always delightful. So I appreciate that, Duck. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Unshaved Testicle is back. They're once again reiterating that they are the former I'm Your Density, now Unshaved Testicle.
Upgrade.
I have 3 favorite Stephen King things this year. 1, my brother gifted me a pop Funko figure of Stephen King, which watches over me as I write. 2, Later, a short and delightful ghost story he released earlier in this year. Even though Billy Summers has hundreds of more pages to get lost in, I still prefer Later. And 3, that Stephen King made it through alive and will be able to entertain us all longer. Yeah, those are some good things.
Yeah, that is something to appreciate every year, really.
Absolutely. Hopefully he has many, many, many more years to come.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. Jerk Stabworthy says...
Matt is so just a little inside baseball. I pull the questions every week, right? I pull the questions into the script every week. And every week I forget to put a name next to who's supposed to read the question. And so Matt and I attempt to do this as we're going through the questions. And so Matt is, as he's about to read this next question, putting an S down next to the one after it to tell me that I have to read that one. But instead of an S, he put a D. And so I highlighted it while he's trying to read, going like, hey, what are you doing here, bud?
And then I tried to delete it, but I deleted the first letter of the poster's name, and then I just ended up typing another S, and it's just a nightmare.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah.
Why don't I put those there when I'm copying and pasting them in, Matt? The world will never know.
Or maybe I can wait until I'm not actively reading.
That could be
to do that part of the job.
That could be too.
All right. I'll get back to that later. Jerk Stabworthy says, does Midnight Mass count? I mean, I know Big Steve literally had nothing to do with it, but I mean, come on. We got 2 books this year, and they were both pretty great, but my favorite King-related thing was setting up a 100-inch projector screen in my living room and watching the Dr. Sleep director's cut. I'm eagerly awaiting anything else Flanagan does in the King universe.
Me too, and yes, official Kingslingers ruling Midnight Mass counts. Yep.
Good to know. Now I really want to see it.
All right. Next we have Baby Can You Dig Your Sam, as we've already said. That is Jane's sister. So we might see some familiar stuff in this one. In a year with not many positives, this podcast, damn it, Sam. This podcast has been a highlight and something I look forward to each and every week. I cannot thank the two of you enough for your role in maintaining my sanity during the dark days of 2021. Seriously. Well, thank you, Sam. Honestly, this podcast helped us maintain our sanity as well. So
that's true. It's something to look forward to every week. We always have fun doing it. It's funny. I think whatever week it was where we either had to take a break or had to skip something, I remember just being like something felt terribly off that whole week. So.
Yeah, it feels weird. It feels really weird. Sam goes on to say, for Christmas, not only did I get my face photoshopped into the Overlook party picture at the end of Kubrick's The Shining. Yep, this is Jane's sister. I also got a copy of Billy Summers and a gunslinger throw pillow with the iconic first line. So a very King Christmas for me. Of all the movies I watched related to King's work this year, I have to give a nod to Return to Salem's Lot, which has absolutely nothing to do with the book except there are vampires. Somehow this movie escaped me and my sister in our video store days, and watching it with her really brought back my youth. I was literally crying at the unintentional hilarity of this movie. A must-see for anyone who appreciates camp.
Sounds like another entrant into other levels of the tower, Scott.
Yeah, we're going to have to do that. By the way, Sam goes on to say, now that y'all are planning a pilgrimage to Bangor, and I've also pointed out that going in November is not the best idea, I'd suggest adding it onto the second season. Matt won't really fully appreciate the tour without a deeper dive into Derry. And look, here's the thing. I'm not saying we're definitely going to immediately put it on the schedule, but I think Sam has a really good point that you taking a pilgrimage without really experiencing Derry would be stupid.
Okay,
because
fair enough.
So much of that visit will be places in Derry that you really haven't seen.
Wait, it's not really Derry though, right?
No, it's Bangor, but yes. Like Derry is Bangor.
Okay. I get it.
Like I can't even talk to you about the standpipe. See, yeah, you need to read. Okay. We can't go before you read it for sure.
I guess I'll read it.
Well, no, don't, because I want to do anything on.
Okay. I guess I'll not read it until later. All right. So excited about that, by the way, our pilgrimage.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Cy Scott 19 says there are many.
It's not me, by the way.
It's not you. It's another one. There are many Stephen King related favorites I could answer with along with what some others have said, like the 2 books he put out this year, which I loved both. This podcast, no, not my answer. I'm not cheating, though my answer is related, which I found this year. And I'm finally catching up on right as you were reaching the point where you were at the review I made in December by Brick Chimp. But ultimately, it is rediscovering some King stories I had not revisited until following along with the other levels of the tower with this podcast. I want to especially mention the audiobook version of this book. Like Matt and some others I've been following with the audio versions of the stories, and Bronson Pinchot's reading of this book is just phenomenal. He really just throws himself totally into every character he reads, and it is delightful. On a sad note, and not entirely related to King, I have to say that the passing of Betty White on New Year's Eve is like one last FU from 2021. It is an ending that even King would not have dared write. Rest in peace. Yes.
Yeah.
That is a bummer. There's been a lot of bummers in my life in 2021. But this podcast, Scott, helped me pull through. So
me too. People Magazine was going to have a whole cover issue about Betty White turning 100, and it was in the mail, and then she died. And so now there's a big cover that says Betty White turns 100, and it's just so sad. It's just so sad.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah. All right, we have Dark Beer Rules, who says, I absolutely love reading all the responses you guys get every week, but I think my favorite King thing this year was reading all the Do the King thing submissions. Well, okay, not all 39 of them. I mean, come on. Nobody has time to read that. I did. I read that. But the ones I did read, I loved. The top 3 were truly spectacular and reminded me that if I want to call myself a writer, I've got to actually write something. Yeah, that's a pretty important part of it. Uh-huh. Between those stories and the sheer volume of King's writing that you guys inspired me to read from beginning to year with the Institute, then absolutely freaking loving The Talisman, To Hearts in Atlantis, Do McKee, rereading The Wind Through the Keyhole, and my favorite podcasters, Blockade Bill, Room Through the Keyhole with my favorite podcasters, Blockade Billy, Joyland. I'm constantly amazed at how wonderful each of King's works is and how different each is from the rest. Stephen King is a great writer, and if you two bring an extra measure of joy to reading his work. Well, thank you, Dark Beer Rules. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think a lot of times people, the lazy short critique of King is that like, oh, look, all his characters are writers, but like he writes a lot of different things. We're seeing this right now with this story we're reading right now.
Yeah, there's no writers in this story.
Yeah, there's none.
Yeah, shut up, person who would say that.
Hypothetical person who said that. Yeah,
idiot. Yeah, I'm once again Dark Beer Rules. Glad you had a good year of reading, because that is a great way to spend your time.
Yeah.
Shenanigoat says, my favorite King related thing from this year has been reading the books for season 2. I've been a huge King fan for the last 20 years or so, but somehow hadn't read any of the season 2 books until now, except for The Stand. I'm about 100 pages into The Talisman and loving it. Everything's been great, but so far the Hearts in Atlantis audiobook and William Hurt has been the standout. Thanks for inspiring me to finally read these fantastic books.
That's awesome. We will be right behind you on The Talisman, Shenanigans.
Yeah, I'm glad you read the Hearts in Atlantis book in its entirety, because or listened to it rather. William Hurt really elevated that. That was just a stellar experience for me. We
gotta schedule that conversation where we talk about that book as a whole. That'll be like a bonus thing.
Sure.
I don't know when we're gonna do that, but we've got to do it.
Yeah.
Complicated 9519 says, my favorite King related things this year would probably be his new book, Billy Summers. Without story spoilers, it has a small connection to one of his other famed books, and it was nicely done. There's also the fascinating painting in the book that really caught my eye. Wonderful, well done. I listened to the audiobook, and for Christmas, my wife got me the hardcover book, so that is a wonderful surprise in its own, too. Yeah, I really, really, really loved Billy Summers. Great, great book. 2 really good books this year. I think I liked Billy Summers a bit more than later, but good books.
How old will I be before like a King book comes out and I can just read it, Scott?
Well, I mean, how old are you right now?
36.
Yeah, I mean, like 50 is the new.
Oh, okay.
The new 30, right?
Great. It's great. It's great. Good. Okay.
I mean, no, honestly,
who knows, man? Anyway,
sooner than you'd think. I think
someday
I will release you eventually from your tower.
No, you won't. All right. Kids Kitchen says, my favorite King thing for 2021 is finding the hotel room from The Shining by accident. I remember I recently moved to Colorado and made a plan to visit the Rocky Mountain National Park in December. I booked a sorry, they said the hotel, not the hotel room. I don't know why I read that. I booked a vacation rental in Estes Park and had a nerdgasm when I rounded a corner and unexpectedly encountered the Stanley Hotel in all its glory. Is this from the movie? Is this the actual hotel from The Shining? Questionable. Does this human place create inhuman monsters? I'm not sure. Am I going to go delightfully explore the grounds and history of this property? Absolutely. These thoughts ran through my head as I played Kubrick's theme song and slowly rode up the driveway. All I know for sure is I had a blast following the baby hedge maze with my bag of gift shop goodies in hand.
Yeah, Stanley Hotel is great. I was there a few years ago when I came and visited you, Matt, and then I went to the Stanley Hotel. You had children to take care of.
I have seen the Stanley Hotel in a driving by sense, but I have not been to the Stanley Hotel. We
stayed there and it was so great. We went on the ghost tour, of course, which was fun, even though I don't believe in ghosts. But I did a thing so the Stanley Hotel, for those that don't know, I think probably everyone listening to this knows, but is the hotel that King stayed in where he originally got the idea to write The Shining. And so the thing I did while I was there is I woke up at 2 a.m. and I just left my hotel room, just left my wife alone in the murder hotel, and then just went to the general area, on the ground floor, and just sat there and read The Shining. And it was awesome. It was great. It was so great.
Sounds like a peak experience.
It was really, really awesome. It was great. And then I got a respiratory infection from your demon children who infected me.
They're just strengthening you, Scott.
It was that was my first experience with the illness that children will bring, and now I'm living that fully now. But God, that was the sickest I had been in a decade.
Yeah, and now that's just a Tuesday.
Yep. But yeah, I'm so glad you got to check out the Stanley Hotel. It's very fun, and they have fully embraced their existence as the Stephen King Shining Hotel, because they made a little mini hedge maze and there's stuff everywhere about, like, it's just they've really leaned into it in a fun way.
Yeah, that's very fun. They are the meme.
It's me, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Walking Dude 22 says King has been a bigger part of my year this year than he normally is. The very first book I read in 2021 was Carrie. I also read the first 3 Dark Tower books, Elevation, and all the books from season 2 of Kingslingers. The best part, falling in love again with my old favorites. And of course, your Kingslingers podcast. Damn it. I'm not your number one fan or anything dangerous like that, but I never miss an episode and thoroughly enjoy your conversations.
For a second, I was like, man, it's weird how many people who enjoy Stephen King enjoy reading, and then
did you really, Matt?
And then I was like, no, it's not weird.
Glad
makes perfect sense.
Glad this isn't our day job, Matt.
Yeah, Jesus. Anyway, I'm going to rapid fire a couple answers here. April S says, my favorite Stephen King item of 2021 is Chapelwaite. It was amazing. I just binge watched it a few days ago.
Yay!
And I'm so glad. I don't know if that was because we recommended it or not, but in either case, it is amazing.
It is.
I said this before, but like, more people should watch Chapelwaite. It's great. It was really fun.
It's great that we've managed to collect all in one place the 17 people that watch Chapelwaite.
Yeah. Yeah, we should start a club or something. The Chapelwaiters.
We need to get a button that says I watch Chapelwaite and see how many we sell. And that will definitively let us know how many people watch Chapelwaite.
That's a good idea, Scott. Yeah, I like where your head's at. All right. Next, Steve L says, my favorite thing besides every Thursday, I see what you did there, would be reading another gem in Billy Summers. It was fresh and new and still had that warm, cozy feeling of reading a King book, like lying down with the one you love. All the parts fit together perfectly, and you're very content and safe and free from the outside world for a bit. The next best would be writing my very first ever fiction story for the Do the King Thing contest. I truly appreciate that. I literally had that story running in my head most nights as I was trying or falling asleep for years. It started as a relaxation technique and just kept going. Getting that story out was an incredible load off my shoulders moment. Thank you. But seriously, that still doesn't match. Looking forward to your podcast each Thursday. You'll just have to get over being embarrassed about this praise. Yeah. Don't change, but accept the facts that you have something golden between you two on Kingslingers. I don't hand out praise for nothing.
See, this is the thing, is like, I agree. We're fucking awesome. But like, I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah.
Having other people say that to me is no.
Yeah. Well, yes. Thank you. Appreciate that. And I really kind of relate to what you said about having like a story stuck in your head for a long time. I used to do that. Like, I went through a period of time where I didn't write as much as I thought about writing. That was actually the reason why me and my friend Michael originally started our podcast, So-Called Writers, which was just meant to get us writing. And then that was actually the progenitor of the podcast, which became Do the Right Thing, which is the podcast that, Do the King Thing is in partnership with. So anyway, very much empathize with having a story that you just need to get out, and how good that can feel to finally get it out.
For sure. Yeah. All right. Sorry, lost my place. Jennifer D says, my favorite Stephen King thing this year is kind of weird. I had surgery in May, and while recovering in the hospital, I drifted in and out of consciousness listening to 11/22/63. I know the story well, so could easily pick it up when I woke. As the days went on, I noticed that more and more often staff was hanging out in my room, sometimes sitting in my bedside chair while I slept. They started asking me about the story and were surprised to hear it was King. I think it created a whole hospital floor of constant readers who had no idea of his scope. That's a delightful story. It's delightful.
That's so fun. I want to make a movie with this as the premise.
That's so great. And I finished reading. So here's what happened. I started reading 11/22/63 like a month ago. And then I did the thing where like real life got in the way and I just wasn't reading much outside of our podcast stuff for a while. And then I realized like last Tuesday that, I was one book off of my Goodreads goal. I had 49 books and I wanted to get to 50. And I was only about 150 pages into this 800-page book. And I just like blitzed my way through this book and finished it Friday afternoon, New Year's Eve. I was like, yes. But God, it had been, I think, since that book came out that I read it, and that's such a good book, Matt. Holy shit. Like, here's what I'll say. I don't know what we're doing after season 2, but there's like 2 books I really want to talk to you about, and that's it and 11/22/63. Like, those are the 2.
Yeah, there's definitely a few books where that are on my list as just like, well, I'm going to read this eventually, regardless of whether we do it for the podcast. So we kind of might as well do it for the podcast.
Yeah, it's God. I really think I like his 21st century books. I've enjoyed them all basically to varying degrees. I really think that's his like 21st century masterpiece. Like that's the best book he's written in the last 20 years. It's so fucking good.
Cool. That's a huge endorsement.
Yeah.
All right. Sigma says, becoming a small part of the King community because of you guys has been really fun, especially when I answer with my elaborate anime answers or tag y'all on Japanese covers on twitter.com. I was surprised when you said one of our listeners, Sigma, during the Low Man overview. It made me realize I've finally come out of my shell. I don't really keep up with adaptations, so this is all I've got as an answer. Call me when they make a Stephen King anime. Dark Tower would be Sakuga.
If they made a Stephen King anime, I don't know what I would do. Would I watch it?
I think you would, honestly.
I think I'd have to, but I'd hate it.
Well, what would that? But would you though? I mean, what would that be like?
This is an existential. I can't deal with this right now, Matt.
Yes. Well, okay. Memes aside, you have enjoyed a couple of animes, so just imagine that like the people who made those animes are the ones that made the Dark Tower anime.
We're good. Okay. Yeah. I'm back. I'm back again.
It's funny now. I can't remember which animes you liked though. So that's
there's dozens of them.
Did you like Mob Psycho?
Yeah, I like that one. Okay.
Yeah,
I like that one. I like the one that's just literally about ping pong.
Yeah,
that was pretty fun.
I like that one too.
I didn't like. There was one that you really liked that I did not like.
Psychopaths.
Yes, did not like that one.
Yeah, and then all the other ones, I think we've agreed that we disliked. So
every time I think of anime, I think of Code Geass, Lelouch of the Rebellion, and I get angry all over again.
I was also just thinking about that.
God, I hated that thing. Sorry if that's your favorite anime, everyone.
Not, we don't mean to hurt your feelings. People are allowed to like different things.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sigma. I'm glad you came out of your shell. That's great. And those Japanese covers you send us are always really great. I don't know. You don't check the Kingslingers Twitter that often, Matt, because you're scared of spoilers, but Sigma sends us some, like, they're just really, really badass looking covers.
Cool. I'll check that out.
All right. And that is it. Thank you, everyone who shared what your favorite Stephen King thing was of 2021. And now, Matt, I'm going to turn the question towards you. What was yours? 2021 was a big Stephen King year for you. What was your favorite thing?
I really liked Chapelwaite a lot. Out of the adaptations that we watched, I really liked Dr. Sleep a tremendous amount. Like that was a huge surprise how much I liked that.
Yeah. And
in terms of like the books that we read, Hearts in Atlantis overall has really stuck with me really hard. Yeah, that might be recency bias because I know that I've enjoyed everything that we've read. I mean, Insomnia had a huge impact on my views of death, honestly.
Sure.
And as I mentioned, I was going through some death related shit this year. That's 4 things, and I realized that. But you and I live a very King centric life right now.
That is very true.
So I think I'm allowed to have 4 things personally.
It does upset me that none of those 4 things were finishing the Dark Tower series.
I honestly wasn't sure if that happened in 2021 or 2020 because of time.
It did.
Yes. In that case, that was also that's the 5th. I get to have 5.
We finished the Dark Tower. You got to the coda in February of 2021.
Okay. See, that was basically not 2021. Yes, that was, amazing. Still kind of, grappling with the consequences of that. How about you? What was your favorite King thing in 2021?
I mean, I really enjoyed you seeing the end. I mean, it's like, See, here I get to break the rules and say this podcast has been absolutely delightful. It's been such a fun. It's been so fun seeing you experiencing these books and getting to talk through them with you. And I've learned so much about King and why I love these books so much through this process. I really, really loved the Do the King Thing contest as well. I thought that was really marvelous, and I was so thrilled with the response we got and the quality of all the stories. It was better than I could have possibly hoped for, except for the administration on our end. That was not the good part. But
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll say Chapelwaite as well. I'll say Billy Summers. I'll say my continue. Let's see how many King books I read, because I'm doing my read through, and I'm almost done with my chronological read through. I'm going to try to finish it up by like first quarter this year. I got 8 more novels to read, but let's see how many of these things I read. How many King books did I read in 2021? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16,
Jesus Christ.
17, 18, 19, 20.
What the fuck?
Of the 50 books I read in 2021, 20 of them were Stephen King books, and that's not counting the rereads for the podcast.
That's
so add another 5 on top. So about half of the books I read in 2021 were Stephen King books. So
I mean, I only just realized how insane it is to read 50 books in a year. Like just this moment. So.
Well, I mean, to be fair, like some of them were short books.
Okay. Well.
Like I'm counting the books I read about child rearing that were a couple, like 100 pages or something. Like I put those on my list.
Yeah.
I give myself credit for those.
I have a hard time just reading the like 15 books that we have to read between our podcasts, but
yeah, but you have three like fully operational children. That's true. My Death Star is still being built.
I don't. That was great.
All right, Matt. Let's move on to next week's question. What we got?
Next week's question: favorite prison break in storytelling, successful or otherwise? Because as Scott and I were discussing this, we realized that there's a lot of prison breaks in fiction that are they're not successful, but are still good. Some good storytelling there.
Absolutely. Tons of great choices here. Let us know what you got. And that is going to do it for us this week. Next week, we will be continuing with The Eyes of the Dragon. As we said, it's the penultimate episode. We've got 3 more episodes, but it is the penultimate book episode, or chapters episode. We're going to be talking about chapters 72 through 101 of The Eyes of the Dragon.
Sounds good. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And the subreddit r/doofmedia is a great place to answer the discussion question or just hang out.
Yes, if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, it's the time to do it, because who knows what we're going to add to the schedule. Now we're talking about it and 11/22/63. Things are getting out of control and you don't want to miss it. So make sure you subscribe.
Yeah. If you're not, sorry, that's not. There. Yeah.
We're fucking mess.
It's really going off the rails. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. A special thanks this week to new Patreon Basani. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff we have over there on the Patreon. We have a lot of good stuff out there every week.
Yes, and make sure you check out the newest Other Levels of the Tower, which I believe will be coming out next week. Right? Yes, that's where it...
Yeah.
It's the second Wednesday. Yes. Okay. Next week, we'll be talking about Hearts in Atlantis. But of course, if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. You can always help us out by sharing this podcast. And of course, by leaving us ratings and reviews. As we said last week, Spotify now does reviews. So if you listen there, do it there. But this week's Spotlight review comes from Apple Podcast user Brickchimp, who we just heard in our discussion question not too long ago. So that's some kismet there, who gives us 5 stars and says, I hate that I didn't find this sooner. After just finishing the Dark Tower series again on Audible, I was given this podcast as a recommendation. I wish I had known this existed so I could follow along with Scott and Matt during my most recent listen. Their astute insight and easy banter make what is already a fantastic series even better. I have binge listened for the past week and I'm already moving on to into Song of Susanna. Can't wait to catch up with the end of the Dark Tower so I can start following along with them through the other books related to the series and ultimately experience their reads in real time. This podcast is a must listen, all in caps. Well, thank you so much, Brickchimp. We appreciate those really kind words. And it is always awkward for me to read people saying nice things to me. But when it comes to reviews, that's the way to get people to write them. So that we're going to keep doing that. But thank you so much for taking the time.
That is true.
Yeah, we're not like, I don't know if we've ever said that, but we're not like reading the reviews out loud to like toot our own horn here. We're doing it because it increases the likelihood that people will leave reviews, and that really helps us.
Yeah.
And we want to let you guys know that we appreciate you. We appreciate it. It takes time to write a review for things you like. Most people write reviews for things they don't like. And so it takes time, if you like something, to sit down and write something like Brick Chimp did, and so many of you have done. And we want to show you we appreciate you. So that's why we read them.
Yes, you all of those of you who write reviews, you're truly people who straighten bad pictures in strange hotel rooms.
Yeah. And those of you who don't write a review but do leave 5 stars, I see you too. You're my people, because I always go into a podcast meaning to write a review, and then I sit there at a blank screen and say, what am I going to say?
Yeah.
And then I just hit 5 stars and say, I'll go back and do it later. And then I forget.
Yeah.
I forget.
Yeah.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us this week. We will see you back here next week for what you want most, more detailed loom work. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.